So the idea behind the name, The Path of the Guide, is really a metaphor for how I think about facilitation. I think the word facilitation actually isn't that helpful because I think a lot of people hear that word and think, well, facilitation is what facilitators do, and I'm not a facilitator because that's not my job title. When I first joined the workforce, I was so surprised by the way that everyone kind of mindlessly adopted this structure, which I like to call the PowerPoint way, where someone just stands at the front of the room presenting a PowerPoint and everyone else listens and looks slightly bored.
From the city of Peaky Blinders, Birmingham, England, I would like to introduce you to Paddy Dhanda.
As the world becomes more automated and the robots take over, it's imperative that we build the right human skills for the future. So pull up a chair, grab a samosa or two, and make yourself very uncomfortable.
Dear friend, thank you so much for joining us today on the Superpower School podcast. I'm your host, Paddy Dhanda, and on today's episode, I have a guest that is going to be sharing a few insights about a topic that's really close to my heart. It's something that I do a lot of in my day-to-day work, and I'm always looking for new inspiration in this field. And so I have Emily, who is a trainer, facilitator, and speaker specializing in innovation and facilitation skills. Her passion is empowering people from all career stages and backgrounds to create more productive and inclusive workplaces that solve problems faster and launch better products. Across her career, Emily has equipped over 1,000 innovators and 250 facilitators. Welcome to the show, Emily Gardner. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, Paddy. Yeah. As we were saying just before we hit record, this is our second go around because the first time I had a terrible cold, but today I'm feeling great, so I'm healed, more or less.
Brilliant. And the show must go on. And I'm so glad we managed to get some time today because it's always a pleasure talking to you. I know we started off as LinkedIn friends and all of a sudden we were talking, we jumped on a call and you were telling me about some of the stuff that you're doing. And I was like, Emily, I've got to get you on the show. So it's great how things work out in the end. And so, Emily, what superpower are you bringing to this particular episode?
Sure. So I want to talk about facilitation. As you kind of mentioned in the bio, that's my real passion. But specifically, we're going to talk about corporate facilitation. So my background, my first job was in the corporate world. I worked for an insurance company for many years. And I think when often people talk about facilitation, they think about people who are facilitators for their job, and that is their job title. But I believe that everyone should be a facilitator, and that's why I'm really passionate about this topic of corporate facilitation and how people can adopt that role in what they do in the day-to-day within the organizations that they work with.
Oh, brilliant. And I mean, you've written a book, which
I have, yes.
you very kindly sent to me. It's over here. Sorry, it's a bit blurry. Let's see.
Yeah, I was going to I'll put mine up at this. There you go.
Oh, awesome.
2 at a time.
Awesome. Tell me a bit of thinking behind the name. And I love the little visuals as well. And that's a whole story right there as to how you got those done for you. So yeah, tell me a bit more about that side of things.
Sure. So the idea behind the name, The Path of the Guide, is really a metaphor for how I think about facilitation. I think the word facilitation actually isn't that helpful because, as I mentioned in the last question, I think a lot of people hear that word and think, well, facilitation is what facilitators do, and I'm not a facilitator because that's not my job title. The Path of the Guide is a title which intentionally leaves out the word facilitation. It does make an honorable mention in the subtitle, but the reason that I called the book The Path of the Guide is that I believe that facilitation is just taking on that guiding role where you're taking people from one thing and to another. And when you think about it in that way, we're all facilitators and we're all facilitating things on a daily basis. You know, everyone who works within a company leads meetings. And in those meetings, we're taking people from a thorny issue or a topic or something that needs to be discussed to some form of resolution. Or that's how we should be doing it if we're going to be successful, right? So that's really the idea behind the Path of the Guide. and the kind of figure that we have on the front that symbolizes this journey that we're going to take people on from one thing into another.
We love that. It's like an adventure, right? We're about to embark upon an adventure, and I really like that sort of almost image in your head that we're going somewhere unknown with the safety of knowing we have a guide that's going to help us through that, and that's absolutely awesome. And so I'd love to hear like how you got into facilitation and on how you discovered that this was a thing that you wanted to specialize in.
Sure. So I actually have this conversation quite a lot with other people because, especially when you're self-employed, you go out there and you try and find your tribe, right? So I know lots of other facilitators, and they all have a similar story in as much as I don't believe that many people start their career thinking, I'm going to be a facilitator. It's definitely not something that came up when I was at school or at university or anything like that. I didn't know it was a job until I was already doing it. So when I left university, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I got an English degree. It's pretty, useless. Not useless, but it's not very directed unless you want to be an English teacher, which I knew I didn't. And I thought, well, what am I going to do now? So I was searching for something with as much diversity as possible. And in the end, I ended up on a graduate scheme. One of those ones where they chuck you around every 3 months and you end up in a different department with different people and you're doing different stuff. I felt like this is the perfect way for me to find out what my calling is. And it was going okay. I hadn't found the calling yet until one day I ended up in the company's innovation department, which sounds very exciting and glamorous, apart from the fact that it was just me and one other person, so 2-person innovation department taking on innovation for the whole company, with no budget, no training, and no resource. So between the two of us, it was really a period of time where we were very experimental. We bought sprints by Jake Knapp and just started trying to, instigate it at will within the organization with mixed success. But I think it was at this point that I realized that people really long for things that makes work less monotonous and more productive. And I found so much joy in being the person that was doing that for other people. And that's really when I became a facilitator and launched this kind of crazy journey into all things facilitation that's existed for me ever since.
And I think you're so right. When you ask people, are you a facilitator? We do have to think a little bit and go, well, I don't have that as my job title, but I guess I do a little bit of that. And many of us do a bit of a disservice, I think, to ourselves as well. I work with a lot of business analysts, product owners, product roles. And like I said, in that space of innovation. And a large part of that role is around facilitation. It could be facilitating conversations with stakeholders, could be facilitating conversations with the technical teams that are going to build the products. And I think it becomes such a fundamental part of the role, but we don't often realize it because we get blinded by all the shiny tools and apps and things that we're going to be using. And I'm always saying in this new world of AI, it's those relationships that we build with people that are going to be super important. That's really the ethos of this podcast as well. It's around that kind of human connection. So I think facilitation is super important for the future, especially when a lot of our cognitive work is going to be taken over by AI. So I think you're in the right space.
Yeah, 100%. I say this on everything that I do because I want to get full credit for it when it happens. But I believe in 10 years' time, when they have the World Economic Forum, that list of the top 5 skills or whatever it is, they always do these things like top 5 skills organizations are looking for. Facilitation is going to be top of that list. I'm so confident in it, especially when it comes to things like AI, as you were mentioning. We saw it after the pandemic as well. People wanted to bring their employees back into the office, but they wanted to do so with purpose. And facilitation is one of the number one enablers you can use to do that, right? So yeah, I think it's only going to rise in importance. And I consider it to be quite a nascent industry, to be honest. There's not that many trainings out there. There's not that many books out there. It's still something that's really growing. And I think the next sort of hurdle is that recognition by the masses that we are all facilitators and we all need to be facilitating. So I'm hoping to, crest that wave. I'm hoping I've spotted something. Let's see in 10 years' time.
Whoa, I'm going to play this clip in 10 years from now, and then you watch. We're going to be looking back at this and going, oh my God, that was the moment when Emily said it. So yeah, we're going to do that for sure. Why do we need facilitators though? Like, you know what? We're all educated, intelligent people in the business world working away. And now we're saying, actually, when we're having a conversation, we need this other person in the room who's a facilitator to help guide the conversation. Surely we're all grown-up adults and we don't need facilitators.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But when I first joined the workforce, I was so surprised by the way that everyone kind of mindlessly adopted this structure, which I like to call the PowerPoint way, where someone just stands at the front of the room presenting a PowerPoint and everyone else listens and looks slightly bored until the end, where the person at the front says any questions and everyone says like, I just want to leave. We've been here for an hour and I want to get another cup of tea. I think when it comes to corporates and the way that they operate, we need to actively think about changing that status quo, because I think we all fundamentally realize that it doesn't really work, but you just kind of go along with it anyway. And it's that strange thing of the struggle to be kind of counterculture within an organization is something that's actually really difficult. We see this with innovation as well. Having worked in an innovation team and being the sort of us and them, the innovation ivory tower, all of that stuff, it's kind of hard to defeat. And I think that people recognizing themselves as facilitators, even if they are facilitating in a room, but they're not there as the facilitator, even if they're using some simple tools and techniques to change the dynamics in that session so that there's more equality in turn taking, there's a defined, to and from, all of these things are so important. And I think we just need to think more actively and proactively about those kinds of things when we get into sessions. And you can learn it, by the way. It's a learned skill. So over time, the more you practice doing this, the more you'll enter every meeting and get those better results each and every time. People often say like facilitation is training and workshops. Well, yeah, it is. But what I want to advocate for is people using this in every meeting that they have every day, and it doesn't need to take huge amounts of planning and huge amounts of brain power and for this to be your full-time job. It's something that you can go ahead and apply in quite simple and subtle ways within the next session you have. Even if it's in 5 minutes, I think there are things that you can pick up and implement immediately that will make a big difference.
Oh, now you have me curious. So if someone sitting at home, driving, doing the school run, is thinking, I really would like to step up and start to facilitate more. Because if I think back to my career history, I used to be a professional introvert. I still am a bit of an introvert, believe it or not. And I started off in software development. And I always assumed other people were going to facilitate and I would be there as an attendee. And it's only when I moved into the profession of business analysis where I found that actually, I should be the one standing up there and I should be the one really getting the conversation going. But it's a scary thing, right? Like to be able to not command the room or command your presence in the room, but just being the person who steps up and says, how can we take this conversation in a direction that's going to help us achieve some outcomes from the meeting, rather than it just becoming a talking shop. So what are maybe some tips that you could give for someone who does want to step up and do more facilitation, but maybe not in a scary way, like, a whole workshop? They just want to start to introduce this into their sort of regular meetings.
Yeah, sure. I like the fact that you mentioned it can be scary. I'm sure you know that statistic that more people are scared of public speaking than death. Like often when I tell people that my job is a facilitator, they're like, that must be awful. I'm like, no, it's not the same as giving a speech and other people just sort of sitting there looking at you. If you do facilitation really well, you give out energy and you get that energy back twofold. One other thing that you mentioned that I just want to pick up on before I directly answer the question, and that's that you mentioned that you're an introvert. I mean, me too. I'm an introvert as well. But I wanted to pick up on that because oftentimes people say to me, I'm an introvert, can I be a great facilitator? And I'm like, introverts make the best facilitators.
Well, hey,
So there you go. A couple of things then. Let's say, Paddy, you have a meeting in 5 minutes and you want to pick up a couple of things. The first thing I would say is you should think about creating some fundamentals of psychological safety in the room. So psychological safety is all about helping people show up and feel like they can express their point of view. And oftentimes we take that as a bit of a given within corporate culture, but of course it's not, because, for example, I might have my boss in the room, that might make me more reserved to say something, or I might enter that room and think, well, all these people are really extroverted and I'm an introvert. I'm probably not going to be able to contribute because I'm going to have to think about how to get a word in edgeways, and that takes my mind out of the meeting and I don't contribute what I wanted to contribute. So I think setting this psychological safety at the beginning of a meeting is important, and you can do that in really simple ways. For example, if you have a meeting that's all about sharing ideas, you could state at the beginning, your opinions and your ideas are welcome. Even this can make a huge difference in the sorts of meetings that we're running. And then my focus would just be on balancing the voices and the perspectives in the room. If you are hosting a meeting that's on Teams or Zoom or whatever you use virtually, I think one of the best ways to do this is to use the chat function. So throw the question or the discussion point out into the group and invite people to post in the chat first. It gives everybody the chance to be on a level playing field, because otherwise you have the extroverts who like to think as they're speaking, throwing their suggestions out there, and the more introverted voices in the room won't get the chance to share, or they'll be, sort of behind the curve. Maybe the conversation's moved on. The other reason that I like this technique is that it gives you, as the facilitator, the sort of power to balance those voices rather than losing control in that situation and thinking, oh no, the same person's talking every time. What am I going to do about that? If you're in the room, you're not doing it virtually. Another great way to do this is to use the concept of the round. This was a tool that was pioneered by a lady called Nancy Klein. She wrote a book called Time to Think, Listening to Ignite the Human Mind. If you haven't read it, you should. It's great. And she shares this idea that when you're in a meeting or a session and you're inviting participation, one of the best ways to do it is to throw the topic out into the room and give everybody a defined period to speak. It might only be 1 minute, but you go around the room, everyone shares a perspective, and it's only then that you invite discussion into the meeting. And this is so powerful because it gives everybody the chance to express their perspective, and it forces the others in the room into that listening mode while they're taking in and listening to other people. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm in meetings, if everyone's shouting over each other, I can't concentrate on what they're saying because I'm just thinking about, I want to say something, it's been 10 minutes. I need to say something. How am I going to say something? When am I going to cut into this conversation? So I think those two things, the psychological safety and the equality in turn taking, are two super easy to implement facilitation principles that you can bring into that next meeting you're running in 5 minutes.
Oh, I love that. And yeah, I wrote an article about checking in for your holiday. And it was the analogy of, when do you feel like you're actually going on holiday? Is it the moment you start packing your suitcase? Probably not. Is it the moment that you arrive at the airport? Kind of. But to me, the moment that I feel like I'm really going on this holiday is when I've checked in and I've given my suitcase over and I've spoken to the person who's checking me in. And that's when I'm like, I'm in the zone now. And I was using that as an analogy for a meeting because, yes, we're all at the meeting, but are we really part of this conversation? And it's only, like you say, when you get that opportunity to speak and kind of get a bit of a check-in with the facilitator, that you really do feel you're contributing. So I love that idea of balancing the or giving everyone equal voice right at the start so that they have that opportunity, which I think is great. And would you say in a corporate environment, then as a facilitator, there are certain things you need to be aware of versus perhaps if you weren't in that environment? Like, what are some of those things that you should be aware of?
Yeah, there definitely are. And I'll give you a bit of an example, because as we've discussed, my background is in innovation. So I started out doing it with mixed success, as I mentioned, in the insurance company. And then I moved into consultancy. And what I was doing there was going into a whole bunch of different companies and running innovation workshops and sessions for them. And these really illustrated super well the different dynamics that you're going to come up against when you start implementing these sorts of principles. And one key thing that always comes to mind for me is the role or the involvement of the sponsor of a project. And I'm sure this is something that a lot of people who are listening will be able to empathize with. You know, when you're working on a project and you have a project sponsor, that person has such a massive influence on all of the interactions that you have that surround that project. Whether they're in the meeting or not in the meeting, they have an influence. But from my experience working in innovation, more often than not, we would talk with the sponsor and actually ask them not to attend a lot of the meetings so that they weren't there to have that massive influence on the room. So if you're working in a project, the personalities and the people that you have involved is really going to be your key consideration. It's not going to be sort of a one-size-fits-all approach to doing these sorts of things. You need to think about who's involved, what dynamic are they bringing, and how can we think about that dynamic. When I work with, well, I was going to say facilitators, but I do a lot of work with people who are aspiring facilitators who want to work on this skill, right? And one of the key activities that we always do, I call it fear setting. So it's taking that project or taking that aspect that you want to facilitate and actively triggering your kind of worst fears for that session. And that surfaces a lot of these kind of dynamics that we see in corporate cultures. So it's essentially inviting you to sit and to think about those dynamics. And once you've thought about them, you then kind of set the fear by listing 10 things that you're going to do in a sort of chronological order, 10 things that you're going to do if that situation arises. So I think this fear setting process is something that's really important to do. I do it ahead of every workshop that I run, you know, and it also helps you as the facilitator to relax a little bit. You've already played through the worst case scenario and you know what you're going to do if it arises. So it gives you a little bit more comfort, I guess, when you're in the moment.
Oh, awesome. And talking about techniques, I had an idea. I thought I'll put you under the spotlight because you've probably used lots of techniques and it's always great hearing other facilitators sharing some of their favorites. So I was going to give you a couple of situations and I'd love to hear like, what are some of your favorite techniques?
Okay, let's go for it.
Okay, so I'll start off with probably some lighthearted stuff. So we're trying to build some connection in the room, bit of an icebreaker, energizer, but not the cringe-worthy stuff, because I know that can be a bit cringy sometimes. I'm a massive fan of icebreakers, by the way, but I do absolutely appreciate they need to be used with purpose. So if you have a group of people and we want to create some quick connection, what might be some icebreakers that you would use?
Sure. Okay. So I'm going to refer a little bit back to the book now. I have a phrase in there that I really like to tell people, which is that for me, the first rule of icebreakers is don't call it an icebreaker. It's like the kind of Fight Club type of thing. So any session you have where you're like, we're going to start with an icebreaker, you're immediately going to alienate a whole bunch of people in the room that associate it with the cringy stuff. So For my icebreaker, firstly, I would probably just call it like the first activity. And then it would kind of depend on the context. And in the book, I talk about these kind of 3 different types of, I'm going to keep using the word icebreaker or initial activity. 3 types of initial activity. And I'm trying to remember all 3 categories off the top of my head. One of them is mindset relevant. So, for example, if you're going to be running a creative session where you really want people to turn things on their head, something like the icebreaker called Revolution, where you give people something they'll be familiar with, say a place like a gym or a restaurant or something like that. You ask them to turn everything they know about it on its head to come up with new ideas. That can be a really nice mindset relevant one. You can do an environment relevant one. So I love music, and I often like to do this as an initial exercise. If I'm going to be with people for a longer period of time, I'll ask them to share a song that they're really into at the moment, and then I'll use that to make a playlist that we use for the rest of the session. That's a really nice way to get people to open up. And the last one has come into my mind just as I was speaking, as I'd hoped it would, is a topic relevant one. So, for example, I ran a workshop recently on customer loyalty. And an obvious way to start that session was to ask people in the room, what brand are you the most loyal to? And where does that loyalty come from? Because it gives you that food for thought to sort of continue into the rest of the session.
So interesting. You talk about the name or the word icebreaker and that perception that you can have. I had Jan Keck on the podcast.
Yeah.
And as you'll know, Jan advocates
Ice
the
melters. That's what I should
ice
have
melters.
said.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Because it does sort of paint a picture in your mind. So you say icebreaker, this kind of cold, solid state that you then need to break with a sledgehammer, as Jan puts it. So I do like ice melters as a word. And then at times I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to call it what it is. And then hopefully when we actually go through it, people will value it. But I totally get it. I think we've been burnt so many times in the past where, you know, someone's come along and gone, oh, I'm going to run this activity just to make everyone look silly. And then we'll get into the meeting and it's like, oh no, I didn't sign up for this. So yeah, thank you for that. My next scenario is a situation that could really disrupt a meeting. So where you have conflict in the room and you're finding there are differences of opinion, could be quite a sensitive topic, could be a topic that people are very opinionated about. How do you deal with that as a facilitator?
Yeah, that's a really, really nice one. I feel like I'm always going off on these tangents, but let me answer it by starting with a story. So I think the worst workshop I ever ran, or the one that sticks in my mind, that sort of recurrent nightmare that I get, is a workshop that I ran for a product team. And ahead of the sessions, everything had been quite fine. You know, me and my colleague had met with the product owner a few different times, and they'd seemed generally receptive to the idea of having this workshop. And the premise of the workshop, we were going to look at a solution that had been built somewhere else in the business and see if and how it could be applied to this other part of the business. And we got into the session and things started to go kind of badly, you know. The product owner had a bit of a change of heart, shall we say, in the session, and started sort of raising all sorts of difficult questions and sort of putting down other people. We decided to do a breakout room activity to kind of paper over the conflict, and then I entered the breakout room and they were arguing with all the other people in the breakout room, and I was like, okay, this is a lot. And in that session, I left and I was like, something here has gone wrong. You know, there must be something we can do to prevent that sort of situation in the future. And looking back at the agenda that we'd planned, we had so much that we wanted to cover, and for that reason we cut some corners. And one of the things that I always do, ever since that day, it's never dropped once since then, I always do is introduce mindsets into the room. they could be one or two things. My favorite one is share the air, which is all about quality and turn taking. And when you share these mindsets at the beginning, when those conflict situations do arise, they're so much easier to deal with because, firstly, you've got that consensus from the beginning from the participants. Yes, these are the mindsets. We understand. We're happy to work in this way. We're not going to shout down other people. We're going to be respectful of each other's views, all of this sort of stuff. And then when the conflict does arise, it's so much easier to point back to that mindset and say, just remember, we agreed in this session, we're going to share the air. And I think that does so much to help mitigate those conflict situations. Thinking about that workshop now, I can't really blame the product owner for what happened because we never said, there are ways in this session that we're going to do things and there's ways that we're not going to do things. And that's on me and my colleague that we didn't do that, So I think that idea of setting mindsets is something that takes like 2 or 3 minutes, but it really helps with those conflict situations throughout.
Oh, brilliant. And I think one of the things that you learn as a facilitator over time is you try things and sometimes they don't always land, or you seriously reflect and go, what could I have done better that time? And that's just part of the learning experience. So don't beat yourselves up if you do end up in that situation, I guess, is the key message as well, right?
Yeah, 100%. In my old job when I used to work at the consultancy, we used to have a graveyard and we would have a team session where we would come and we would have built our graves for the graveyard. And it would take situations that at the time really weren't funny at all and help you really digest that learning and not carry it into the next session. Because when you're running workshops all the time, the last thing you want is just to have this catalogue of errors in your mind about how you went wrong in the past. The worst one that ever happened to me that I put on a gravestone was that I, at the beginning of the pandemic, made a beautiful Miro board for a workshop that I was running, but forgot to lock all the assets and got into the session. Couple of hours of really productive work, and then one of the participants accidentally deleted the entire thing, and this just couldn't get any worse. But you live and you learn from these things. That's part of what makes facilitation joyful, I guess, is it's never exactly the same, is it? And it's always live and a little bit unpredictable.
Yeah, otherwise it'd be boring, right? If it was just robotic. And then you could probably AI it, and that's something we don't want. So as long as there's no fixed rules, I think we'll always need human facilitators. It's when we say that there's an algorithm for this, and if you just follow these rules, it's always going to work. That's when I think there's a danger of it becoming automated, and we don't want that.
Yeah, so that's true. I did do a bit of an experiment, by the way, with ChatGPT to see if it was a good facilitator. And ChatGPT thinks that you can run 6-hour sessions without any breaks. So I'm not sure I'm going to be outcompeted anytime soon. It left me reassured.
I did a similar thing, actually. This is so interesting. So I put into ChatGPT about like the future, and I said, in 10 or 15 years' time, what will facilitation look like? So with the acceleration of AI and everything else, does ChatGPT still see a future for humans? And it was a bit biased, I think, and it was talking about kind of AI facilitating things. So that was kind of interesting. But I just think there are so many nuances that we have as people that, yes, you could probably have an AI bot doing that kind of facilitation, but I think it would only appeal to certain audiences, I feel, in certain situations. So again, let's fight for humans. So as we approach the end of this episode, and I can't believe how time has flown, Emily, if our listeners could take away one tip from the book, what would that be and why?
Sure. So I mentioned this right at the start when we were talking about the cover image and the title, but I think this from and to is just such a simple thing that you can take and implement to whatever it is that you're doing after you listen to this podcast episode. Look at your next meeting and think about, where do we want to go from and where do we want to go to? And you'll leave that session feeling more confident and feel like, you've achieved some great productive things, because I think that from and to metaphor is something really powerful for the way we work in the day-to-day.
I can't finish the episode without giving a shout out to the amazing illustrator of the book.
Oh.
I was saying to you before we kicked off, I was like, look, I love the little icons and the visuals in the book. And can you tell us the story behind that very quickly?
Yeah, sure. So the illustrations are from a pixel market, but I was sharing before that my partner is a designer. That's his job. So I'm very lucky. I've got the in-house support here. Paddy was saying that my website looks nice, and I said, yeah, I have absolutely nothing to do with that at all. So yeah, it was great. Ed was one of the first readers of the book, and he really took that and helped to make it into the visual identity that the book has, which has really brought it to life for me as well, I have to say. When it arrived, it was like, this is super exciting and aligns really well to what I had in mind when I was writing it. Although I'm not a particularly visual person, so he's done a great job of taking something from my brain and making it into a visual reality, which is really cool.
And I think it's testament to your facilitation skills, Emily, the fact that you managed to rope your partner into doing your website, the visuals. I think that's just brilliant facilitation skills, if I'm honest.
There we go. Useful in all aspects of life.
So, folks, if you want your partners to do some work for you, like read the book, and you'll totally win. But no, on a serious note, I do love the way that you've positioned the book. It's got this metaphorical structure to it. It's like you're going on a journey, and it is just such a nice read. And I was talking before we started, just the size of the book as well. It's like perfect. Stick in your little bag when you're off on those travels, especially if you're on a Ryanair flight, which I am actually tomorrow. I'm going to Dublin. So
great.
I'll be carrying this in my little bag because I'm not allowed to take much luggage on those planes, am I? So we'll fit it in. And before we wrap up, Emily, I'm going to ask you one of my favorite questions as we exit the show. If you could have any superpower to abolish something in the world of work, so get rid of something, and we'll do it for 24 hours, what would that be?
Oh, I think you know what I'm going to say here. I would abolish the PowerPoint way. Get everybody to interact in a different way. And I think if we did that for just 24 hours, we would never, ever go back.
Oh no, Microsoft, close your ears. Close your ears. I know what you mean. I think there should be like part of your degree, every degree, there should be this prep module for how you should use PowerPoint in the right way.
100%. Yeah.
Right.
I'm not anti-PowerPoint before Microsoft come after me, but it needs to be used in the right way.
100%. Yeah. So that we don't just unleash PowerPoint maniacs out there in the world. So yeah, let's do that. Sounds good. And Emily, where can people get hold of the book, and how can they get in touch with you if they want to know more?
Sure. So the book is called The Path of the Guide. You can find it on Amazon. You can get it paperback. You can get it on Kindle. If you want to look me up, I'm Emily Gardner Facilitator on LinkedIn. I post videos, tips and tricks. I did one for every week of 2024 on facilitation tips. So if you want to pick up some new skills, then feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a message, and watch the videos.
There we go. And we'll include those links in the show notes as well, folks. So yeah, I just want to thank you for joining me today, Emily. It's been such a pleasure. I'm glad we managed to record the episode once you were feeling better. And yeah, I'm really excited to read the book. So thank you for sending it to me as well.
Thanks so much, Paddy. Thank you.
It's the end of another episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please do connect with me via LinkedIn and drop me a message and let me know your favorite takeaways from the episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Superpower School newsletter so that you can be notified of all future episodes. Simply visit the website www.superpowers.school. Thank you once again.